I'm not some damsel in distress waiting for you to ride in on your high horse.
The winged victory came to the Louvre in pieces, and people still line up to see her.
Listen, I'm not even sure where to begin, because this Rachel Zegler Snow White saga is one of the wildest Hollywood screw-ups I've seen in a minute.
Snow White, budget $250 million, box office $43 million.
It's got everything. A classic Disney story that practically invented the princess formula, a sky-high budget that should have guaranteed a mega hit, and an actress who somehow managed to turn off half the planet with her, shall we say, colorful commentary.
And I can only hope that despite my flaws, and despite my cracks and my breaks, and there are many of them, that at every premiere and everything I do, people will wait in line to see.
If you've been on Twitter, TikTok, or, the actual news, you've probably seen the clips of Rachel bashing the original 1937 film, firing off political hot takes, and complaining about her pay, all while fronting a squeaky clean Disney blockbuster. Let's just say it did not end well.
I didn't mean to offend. I just thought you should know that
That I should know what? That some privileged white guy thinks his opinion matters?
Now, obviously, the Snow White remake didn't exactly help itself. Between rumored rewrites, bizarre, magical creature replacements for dwarfs, and a random dance scene that looks like it popped out of a parody film, the production was already hanging by a thread. But the real kicker is that none of these issues dominated online chatter the way Rachel did. From the moment she started giving interviews, it was like she handed critics a giant neon sign saying, "Drag me, please."
I can also be having the greatest time and simultaneously wishing people would stop sending me death threats.
And that's exactly what happened. So in the aftermath of one of Disney's most epic faceplants, let's sift through the rubble to see how Rachel Zegler herself became the poster child for this fiasco, and why so many fans are pointing the finger directly at her for Snow White's catastrophic reception. Before everything went sideways,
People are like, oh wow, Snow White flopped. Who is surprised? You cast arguably the least genuine, most out of touch, and disliked person in her industry, and her industry is Hollywood. And the bad guy is Gal Gadot.
Rachel Zegler looked like the next big thing. She got discovered by the legendary Steven Spielberg for West Side Story, where she showed off that classic triple threat vibe, singing, dancing, acting, the works. People were hyped for her fresh face, and she seemed to have the charm and vocal range that could slot perfectly into the Disney Princess Hall of Fame. The studio must have thought so too. They cast her as Snow White, presumably expecting another box office goldmine because, come on, it's Snow White. She's basically royalty in the Disney canon.
Now, first things first, Snow White gets her name not from the fairness of her skin, as we obviously know Rachel Zegler would be a miscast in that sense. Instead, she gets her name from surviving a snowstorm.
Early buzz was generally positive. Oh cool, a new star is getting her big break. Sure, some folks raised an eyebrow at the reimagined casting, but for the most part, people were ready to be won over. Fast forward a few months, and Rachel's no longer the bright new talent who's about to dazzle everyone. She's the center of a swirling controversy that overshadowed the entire film.
Her father and mother are king and queen to a utopian communist society. I'm not joking, guys. Everybody shares and is mindful of what each person is getting, and we spread our resources evenly, which is where this idea of fairness, as Snow White is the fairest of them all, is really presented in the film.
So how did someone with such a promising start end up in the crosshairs of literally half the internet? Strap in, because the ride is bumpy. It didn't take long for Rachel to raise eyebrows. She started calling the 1937 Snow White dated and problematic, painting the story as backward for having a princess that basically waits around for a prince.
She's now bragging about the success of Snow White, which is a movie that's going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars. And mainly because of her, and because nobody wanted to support her. There are empty theaters all around the country. We are now at a 1 out of 10 on IMDb for the new Snow White. And
now, yeah, if you watch the old movie today, sure, it might seem old-fashioned, but guess what? Millions of Disney fans have a giant soft spot for it anyway. It's also a critical piece of cinematic history, the first full-length animated feature from Walt Disney. So imagine how those die-hard fans felt hearing the new Snow White actress saying, actually, the original is kind of cringe.
Yeah, we had more dwarfs than we did viewers in most of these theaters. And as you know, there were no dwarfs other than some CGI weird generated version of them.
That's the vibe they got from her interviews. Instead of diplomatically saying, oh, we're excited to modernize some parts while respecting the beloved classic, it was more like she was dragging the original through the mud. That rubbed a ton of potential viewers the wrong way. They didn't see it as constructive criticism, they saw it as a direct insult to something they loved.
Don't alienate half of the country when you're putting out a product meant to appeal to all. It's the Michael Jordan.
Some might argue she was just being honest, but in the world of Disney, where nostalgia is practically currency, coming out strong against a beloved classic is basically rule number 1 on the list of what not to do if you want fans on your side. It set the stage for all the other controversies that followed. If you thought bashing the original was risky,
For every one of the 18 hours I am in the Snow White dress, I expect to get paid. If it's 18 hours, I want 18 hours of pay. I'm sure she got underpaid.
Rachel took it a step further by launching into political commentary, especially around the 2024 election. You've probably heard that old line about entertainers not wanting to alienate half their audience. Let's just say she didn't get that memo. She threw some pointed critiques towards certain political groups, which might be fine if you're just another loud voice on Twitter, but less fine if you're headlining a $200 million Disney spectacle aimed at families of all political stripes.
People have real problems and no one gives a if she got paid for 17 instead of 18 on her multi-million-dollar salary, which is not calculated by the hour.
Almost overnight, social media turned into a battlefield. Half the posts were calling Rachel brave for speaking her truth, and the other half were basically saying, "This is the Disney star, hard pass." The meltdown escalated to full-on boycott calls, which obviously doesn't help a film that's already having an identity crisis. Disney typically tries to keep a tight lid on political drama, so you can imagine the frustration behind the scenes.
So she just encapsulates everything that most of us cannot stand about modern day feminism and the left in general, and Hollywood.
Ironically, her comments overshadowed some legit conversations about how to modernize old fairy tales. Instead, it became, "Oh, you attacked my political view? I'm not giving you a dime for your movie." Boom, instant turnoff for a giant chunk of potential ticket buyers. When you're hoping for a broad audience, especially for a kid-friendly brand, that's the exact scenario you want to avoid.
Her heroine cannot be in love or be saved by a man, the prince, that she's more focused on becoming the leader she was meant to be, as if women in modern day America must make that choice.
The controversies didn't end with the original film criticism or the political rants. In what might be the most tone-deaf comment of all, Rachel openly griped about not getting paid by the hour for long filming days. And look, I get it. Everyone wants fair compensation for work, but maybe complaining about your hours on a Disney princess movie that's paying you a pretty penny isn't the best move when average folks are struggling with everyday bills.
Be a leader as a female and fall in love and be rescued by a prince, like that's incongruous bullshit. That's only the left's version of what it means to be a strong woman or female empowerment.
It came off as a rich celebrity problems moment, especially since Disney blockbusters aren't exactly known for paying their leads peanuts. For many fans, that sealed the deal on her image as ungrateful or entitled. Suddenly, a big chunk of the internet was rolling its eyes saying, "Really, this is what you're complaining about? You're leading a multi-million-dollar film and you're upset about not being paid hourly?"
So, I mean, this woman has clicked every box. And just for cherry on top at the end, she gave an interview last week talking about how they were basically a bunch of white supremacists on the set of West Side Story.
That kind of complaint feels wildly out of touch, especially when you consider how many people face real financial strain. If you're going to star in a Disney fairy tale, some level of PR savvy is expected. You don't whine about your supposed underpayment when your salary is likely more than most people see in years. We should pause here to acknowledge that Snow White itself might have bombed no matter who starred in it.
Where Steven Spielberg and co. were demanding that she prove how Latina she really is, since her name doesn't sound Latina, and she was angrily saying, "Did I have to bring in my little abuelita for you to believe that I was Latina?"
Everything from the dwarfs fiasco, or lack of actual dwarfs, to the messy reshoots contributed to a film that felt half-baked by the time it hit theaters. Critics tore it apart, describing the final product as a weird mashup of tones that never really came together. But let's be real, those issues almost became a side note compared to the Rachel drama.
That's her thanks to Steven Spielberg, who discovered her and made her. So she's an ingrate, she's annoying, and I think she's probably two and done.
Negative word of mouth about her attitude, comments, and demands spread like wildfire online. By the time the movie premiered, a lot of people had already made up their minds not to support it because they couldn't stand Rachel. It's basically the worst-case scenario for Disney. You spend a fortune on a beloved IP, only to have your leading actor overshadow the entire production.
Disney's Bob Iger says their mission is to entertain, not send messaging as Snow White sales compete for worst performing live-action Disney adaptation adaptation ever.
With controversy after controversy, marketing was reportedly toned down, presumably because the studio realized every time Rachel opened her mouth, a new wave of backlash erupted. What's interesting is that the backlash against Rachel didn't just come from one specific group. Yeah, some conservative viewers were turned off by her politics, but plenty of liberals or apolitical folks also weren't feeling her.
And if she hadn't have opened her mouth, I think that this movie might have done well. They might have just been able to ride on the hopium of the movie and some well-cut trailers, and people would have paid to go see it, and then it would have fallen off when people knew it was garbage.
People who generally love reimagined princess stories, progressive themes, or diverse casting still had a problem with how she communicated her opinions. Basically, they found her tone condescending and insulting to longtime Disney fans. Critics, too, picked up on how her public persona overshadowed the project. Reviews often spent paragraphs discussing how her statements had fueled negative hype, how it was impossible to separate Rachel the actress from Rachel the brand risk.
But Rachel Zegler made it so hateable that you really sabotaged and took hundreds of millions of dollars from the studio. I don't know how anyone would ever want to go into business with her ever.
They also noted that her performance might have been fine if the audience wasn't already actively rooting against her. It's hard to walk into a theater with an open mind when you've spent weeks hearing the star tell you the original is worthless, your political stance is garbage, and she's underpaid in the midst of a giant paycheck. In interviews, Rachel often doubled down, painting her critics as people who just hate progress.
Do you know how hard it is to find an attractive young woman in Hollywood who can act and sin? It's not hard. Who just isn't gonna offend half the country.
She talked about wanting a modern Snow White who doesn't wait for a prince, about breaking outdated tropes, and about how those who were bothered by it were simply stuck in the past. Now, that might sound empowering if framed correctly, but the way it came across felt more like she was saying, if you don't agree, you're a dinosaur. Even fans who champion progressive retellings were like, hey, we're down for a strong independent princess, but maybe don't spit on the classic or assume anyone who likes it is a lost cause.
25,000 more just like her knocking on the same doors that she had opened to her. She had the opportunity of a lifetime, and instead of being humble and grateful, she was entitled and a snot.
The whole spectacle left many feeling that her brand of modernization had turned into a lecture instead of an invitation to see a fresh take on an old story. When you add in the political spats, the pay complaints, and the general negativity toward the original film, her overall message got buried under drama. If she had simply presented her idea of a more proactive Snow White without antagonizing fans, the conversation might have been much less heated.
And I will look forward to her not getting cast in any more movies for a long time until she actually does learn something about humanity and humility.
But by the time she tried to clarify or apologize for any of it, the internet had made up its mind. Rachel was the reason Snow White 2025 was basically DOA. Disney is usually a master at controlling narratives. They have PR wizards who can spin almost anything into a positive headline. Yet, they couldn't fix this. One reason is that Rachel never really softened her tone.
Who the fuck is that guy?
It's a weird walk for a weird broad, and I don't like her.
It is, and it's really mean to put her next to Gal Gadot, who's absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
So,
it's not fair.
Instead, she seemed to lean further into the controversies, generating more tabloid fodder and more reason for fans to stay away. There's also the possibility that Disney realized the film's many behind-the-scenes issues, massive budget overruns, last-minute rewrites, that bizarre all-white outfit dance finale, wouldn't hold up under intense scrutiny. So maybe they decided to let the film quietly flop instead of sinking more money into a promotional tour that might lead to more cringe interviews from Rachel.
It's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about
she's gonna die.
true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
Either way, the synergy that usually comes with big Disney releases, merch sales, widespread hype, wall-to-wall coverage just wasn't there. The product tie-ins ended up gathering dust in stores, and we hardly saw any big cast appearances beyond a few controlled interviews. In short, everything about Snow White ended up overshadowed by Rachel's controversies and the gloom around its potential financial failure.
Come on.
Okay, Cheshire Cat.
Go vote blue. And if you disagree with this sentiment, just hit the unfollow button.
Wow, what a scene.
I don't need your business.
Now there's the question of what this means for Rachel's future. Hollywood has a long history of giving second chances, but typically to stars who bring in big box office numbers. If your controversies overshadow your film and your film tanks, That's a real problem. Casting directors might see her as too risky. Why gamble hundreds of millions on someone who can't keep a chunk of the audience on board?
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird. So we didn't do that this time.
Remember, it's not like she just alienated a small niche. She ticked off Disney loyalists, more moderate fans, as well as people who might otherwise like a modern approach but hated being told the original they loved was basically trash. And we haven't even touched on the fact that these same fans might have been turned off by the magical creatures instead of dwarfs.
It was
the
this
people
awakening
that we need
of...
to educate, the people that we need to love into awareness.
Love them in the right direction.
Yeah, because there's nothing more effective than 19-year-olds educating the rest of the voting public while yelling, "Okay, boomer."
Fiasco. Rachel's controversies just poured gasoline on an already flickering flame. So the big takeaway is this: controversy can absolutely tank a film that was already on shaky ground. Rachel Zegler might have had the best intentions, like wanting to present a more feminist Snow White or highlight progressive values, but in doing it so aggressively, she lost the connection to the audience that Disney banks on.
You know what? Maybe Disney does. Maybe you're a tool, you're a pawn in this film. You didn't write it, you didn't direct it, you have nothing to do with the creation of Snow White.
Right.
You should shut up and do the job.
Fans don't like feeling condescended to. They especially don't like feeling personally attacked because they enjoyed a classic film. Multiply that by the political jabs, the pay complaints, and a sense that she's above the original content she's supposed to represent, and you've got a perfect storm of negativity. Whether or not she sees it as standing up for what's right, the sad reality is that her approach alienated a lot of folks who might otherwise have embraced a new Snow White.
This is the difference between a business owner or someone who does very well for themselves in the private sector to become wealthy. This person was born looking a certain way and has a God-given ability to lie.
It's a lesson for anyone stepping into a massive, nostalgia-driven project. Read the room. Don't mock the original. Don't treat potential viewers like idiots or moral relics. And maybe don't rant about your wages to a population dealing with real money stress. Hollywood loves a comeback story, so it's entirely possible Rachel can salvage her reputation. Maybe she takes a break, stays quiet for a while, and then comes back with a role that's so good even the haters can't deny her talent.
Some of you want us to hire actual dwarf humans, and then we thought we would have CGI magical creatures. How about this? We'll still offend the dwarves, but we'll CGI dwarves.
Or maybe she leans into indie projects where being politically outspoken is more acceptable. No one expects a small art house film to cater to a broad Disney crowd. But if she wants to headline more giant franchises, she'll need to seriously rethink her approach to press and public engagement. Because if she carries the star who sank Snow White label, major studios might decide it's too big a risk to bank on her again.
They didn't earn it the same way, and so it comes with this entitlement.
It's a brutal industry, and Disney's financial loss here is not a small footnote, it's an absolute black mark. Whether Rachel acknowledges that or not is another story. Some celebrities learn from these things, pivot, and come out stronger. Others dig in, keep doubling down, and watch their roles dry up. Only time will tell which path she picks. The Snow White fiasco will go down as a case study in how a star's personal controversies can overshadow every aspect of a film.
They had the whole dwarf midget issue where they decided they weren't going to have any midget actors, right? They were having DEI-inspired magical creatures to replace. Yeah.
Sure, the movie had structural issues. Yes, the story felt half-baked, and the random dance party ending apparently had audiences scratching their heads. But ask most people why Snow White 2025 is the butt of so many jokes, and they'll say Rachel Zegler. She didn't single-handedly make the movie fail, but her outspokenness lit the match. And once the flames started, Disney struggled to contain them.
Infusing messaging is not what we're up to, Iger said. We need to be entertaining. His comments were likely aimed at critics like Peltz.
In an era where negativity spreads online like wildfire, having your leading actor step on every possible PR landmine is the last thing you want when you're trying to promote a big tentpole release. In the end, the Snow White meltdown proved that no amount of nostalgia can save a movie from a star who keeps stirring the pot in all the worst ways. Rachel Zegler might be insanely talented, but her public persona, marked by slams against the classic film, pointed political digs, and gripes about her pay, made Snow White a toxic property long before it hit theaters. The film itself was a mess, but Rachel's controversies ensured it had almost zero chance of winning over casual viewers who might have seen it for nostalgia's sake. Disney ended up with empty theaters, unsold merchandise, and a tarnished brand image. And while there's plenty of blame to go around, Rachel has become the face of this flop in the public eye. So what's the lesson here? Maybe that old saying, if you're going to be the star of a beloved fairy tale adaptation, think twice before tearing down the story people loved in the first place. And if you're a studio throwing hundreds of millions into a big remake, you might want to keep an eye on your lead's social media presence, because in 2025, one ill-considered comment can spiral into a full-blown boycott, cost you a fortune, and leave your leading star looking more like a villain than a hero. Disney loves to say happily ever after, but for Snow White 2025, it's more like, sorry, we messed up. And at least in the public's mind, Rachel Zegler bears a huge chunk of the blame. Whether she rebounds or not, this debacle will be remembered as the time a Disney princess lost her crown, largely thanks to her own words.